Welcome in. My name is Arya and I don't waste your time, so let's get straight into it. Ladies and gentlemen, Adobe. Adobe is the topic of today's video and actually the possible disruption risk that comes with Adobe as we kind of corner the acceleration in the age of AI, and AI moves from sort of LLMs and the ChatGPT chatbots to a world where they can now generate images, and then now they're starting to generate videos, which in the process of doing so would kind of render Adobe's products obsolete. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at that story, whether it has any merit to it, or whether investors have overreacted and are selling down Adobe for unjustified reasons. So we're going to recap kind of the situation that's going on with Adobe currently to catch you up to speed and what's happened since the last time that we visited this company. And then we're actually going to move into whether or not any of these risks actually have any merit. All these video AI generated softwares that are coming online, they look pretty impressive. So we'll take a look at one of Marques Brownlee's videos, and then lastly we're going to hop over to my valuation spreadsheet to kind of take a look at like how this company is faring in terms of valuation to growth currently and whether or not that's justified. So with that being said, the current state of Adobe. I tweeted this out earlier on the day of the earnings, which by the way, Adobe always reports earnings so late. I don't know why. But anyways, I said, and this is not stock-based comp adjusted free cash flow, but nonetheless, at that time, it was trading at 17 times trailing free cash flow. In the past 12 months, and probably for the next couple of years, it's going to be growing revenues at 10% plus. And, like about 4%, 5% of that on average has just been price increases over time. So it's a very durable growth profile over the past handful of years. And then, it's a 90% plus retention rate software. So any incremental sort of revenue that you get onto your platform, it's sticky revenues. And then of course, naturally, it's a software business, a very mature software business that they've just consistently been able to raise prices over time. 37% operating margins, 90% gross. And then at the bottom here, I put an incorrect narrative that AI will eradicate their business by next week. How does this not work? And we had some mixed opinions. Some people are convinced that with the ascension of Grok and Sora and all these softwares that it's only a matter of time before Adobe's moat crumbles and this is a company that's going to inevitably go to zero, quote unquote. But at the same time, this is not just a story of, the AI risks and Sora and that type of stuff. There's very real competition from, for example, Canva, which I actually personally use for all the thumbnails. You have Figma, which they tried acquiring and then failed to do so. So in late 2022, 2023-ish, they tried buying Figma for $20 billion. And I'm going to remind you, this is a company that at the time was doing about 500 to maybe $600 million of revenue. So you're buying that, at a price of sales of roughly 33, 35-ish times price of sales. And so that was just for a company, $600 million of revenue. Now imagine Canva with their roughly $3 billion in revenue, what type of premium that would probably receive compared to like a Figma. And, it's a very serious competitor taking massive amounts of market share. So the current state of Adobe, if I were to summarize it, is they have this sort of existential crisis in the AI coming along. And again, we're going to take a look at the sort of videos of that in a second here, but they have that on one side. And then at the same time, for a handful of years, their lower end customer, so for example, me, I would be considered a lower end customer because I don't need the full suite of the Creativity Cloud. I haven't paid a dime to Adobe in order to generate my thumbnails just because I can do it completely for free on Canva. And that's kind of the point here is that, for example, if you pull up the market share charts, you'll see some charts thrown around like these ones right here, where it's like, oh, Adobe, even though that there are competitors, they still have a very good sort of market share. But the thing is, this is based off of like, for example, just revenues in this case, right? And so a big component of Canva's whole business model and like sort of being the anti-Adobe since their birth is that they wanted creative software to be accessible to everyone. So they have a very competitive free tier where it's good enough. And like exactly for me, right? Like I've been on Canva this whole time. I haven't paid a dime to Canva either. I've gotten the free trials, but I haven't paid for it ever. And it's good enough. It gets the job done. My thumbnails come out decently good to the point where like I can use them in my YouTube videos and that type of stuff. And so the bigger issue here is that in revenue terms, they might not have taken that much market share against Adobe. It's only 6% against Adobe's 50% plus. But in terms of business that has been foregone for Adobe, because all of those people that would have in the past probably had to cough up for an Adobe subscription, all those people are now on the free tier of Canva. That is, who knows how much money that could be, right? So with that being said, they have sort of this two-sided issue of the AI thing and also just very real competitors that are taking their low-end customer away. Same thing goes for like a lot of editing softwares that are also good enough. I use DaVinci Resolve, for example, right? So anyways, let's take a look at this Marques Brownlee video. He got early access. I do suggest you watch the entire video, especially if you're thinking of investing in Adobe, just so you kind of see the technology that is currently available. This is actually as of like 3 months ago, I believe. Yeah, 3 months ago, right? So it's from December, so things have improved probably a little bit. I'll link in the description if you're interested in that. But the main thing that I wanted to kind of showcase is towards the end of the video when he goes through the things that Sora at the time was able to do really well. So I'm going to play the clip and then we'll talk about it.
AI generated video. So all that being said, we've seen what it's good at, we've seen what it's not so good at. And you might be wondering, like, what is this tool actually for? And I actually found a few things that are not so scary that are actually pretty good at. So these are the things that I found as of right now that Sora can be used for. Abstracts. So you can be as descriptive as you want and create all sorts of textures and colors and gradients to make an abstract shape move around in a way that essentially looks like it could be a screensaver or just some background piece or whatever you want. I'm sure there's a world where someone's gonna make an NFT out of this stuff, also totally weird, but you can do abstract stuff, for sure. I noticed it's getting better at reproducing text, especially when you ask it for specific text. So there are sometimes background garbled text in these videos, and that's going to continue to happen. But I found that if I asked it for an individual title slide in a style, it actually could give me the correct text on that slide. This animation it gave me of sketching the Empire State Building, this would make a killer title slide or even an intro to a documentary about, the building or Manhattan or something like that. I was very impressed. And then stop motion or, cartoon style characters. Again, like I said before, cartoons don't necessarily have to have realistic movements or physics, so the errors in those things don't hit the eye as much, and so the characters still look like, dare I say, art. They're characters, especially in scenes like this one. The graffiti doesn't have to actually say real words for this to look normal. Like the bear doesn't have to have the correct number of fingers or toes. It just looks like some album art come to life, basically, which I'm sure someone would find useful on social media somewhere. And while we're at it, here's a couple other random prompts that impressed me. I asked for Santa fighting Frosty the Snowman in the style of Mortal Kombat, and it built a readable scoreboard. I didn't ask for the scoreboard, but it built all that with the names and everything, which is pretty crazy. Immediately, again, the details are weird when you start looking at it, but this could be a good inspirational starting point.
So as you can see, and again, I do really encourage you to actually watch the entire video to kind of get a full idea into how powerful is this technology currently. But, it looks promising. It's not like the perfect thing. And as you mentioned, like, especially with sort of the feet and the cartoons, the way some of the characters move and that type of stuff, it's not exactly perfect, particularly if you do humans. It's not going to be perfect yet, but like it can sort of get the job done. Like it's in some cases, for example, the Empire State Building, I think you showed off. Yeah, like this works. Like this could actually be used in a cutscene for a documentary or whatever the case may be, right? So it's definitely not there yet, but if it's this good, this early on in the age of AI, 100%, 5 years down the line, whatever the case may be, like they're going to figure out the technology. It's going to keep compounding on top of previous iterations. And it's going to get to a point where you could throw in a prompt and within a couple minutes, you'll have a pretty decent B-roll footage or a cutscene or whatever the case may be, right? It's not going to be perfect ever. And so that's kind of the point to understand here is like, I think maybe even, 5, 7, 10 years down the line, it's not going to get to a point where it's going to completely replace the need for someone to manually edit or animate or do all these things, but it's probably going to play out the same way where like there's a co-pilot writing code right now. Earlier this year, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, came out and said that 25% of Google's code was being written by AI. And again, I'm going to keep repeating this, but we're like 2-3 years into AI and it's already this powerful to the point where 25% of the code at Google, a premier tech company in the world, these are significant efficiency gains in terms of the workflow of the people working at Google. So in the case of the end users of, if you work at a marketing agency and you're tasked with making logos or stop motion ads or whatever the case may be, anything creative that a big company might need, yeah, odds are you're probably gonna, a couple years down the line, throw in a prompt into Sora or whatever the best video AI generator at the time is. Maybe throw in a couple follow-up prompts and tell the chatbot to, adjust this thing. And actually, Marquez puts an example of I think this one right here. Yeah, so in the original video, and this was made by someone else, so you could actually access other people's videos as well. And so he pulled someone else's video of this house on like by the ocean or whatever, and he says put a golf course nearby, right? And then you can kind of edit the quality of the video and that type of stuff, and it puts a golf course in the background, right? So a couple years from now, going to be AI generated videos, and within a couple prompts you could edit it, and then if you really need to, you could chuck it into a Photoshop or equivalent and fix it up a little bit more. So Anyways, with that being said, to kind of touch on the fundamentals of Adobe, and like we've acknowledged that there's risks to the business. There's definitely a lot of things going wrong. A stock isn't going to be down 40% in a year if there wasn't issues with the company. But like, is it overblown? How much of it is showing up in the fundamentals? And like, more importantly, like, do we have examples in the past of similar things happening to Adobe? So very simply, just to kind of look at the revenues and get an idea of like, is this showing up in the revenues of the business? Not really. Like, we've had periods in the past where there's been a slowdown of revenue growth. Of course, it's not the same Adobe that we've seen in the past decade where it was growing at like, I'm going to switch over to the charting tab actually, because I think this will better demonstrate what I was trying to show. But if we throw in Adobe here, we throw in total revenues, toggle on percentage change. No doubt it's not the same business it was in the past decade. The company is a 10% revenue grower now, not the 25% plus. So we definitely have to take that into consideration when we're, especially when we're doing valuation, right? And then I personally wouldn't really look prior to 2014-ish, because this is when they transformed into a cloud-first company. So historically, Adobe would just sell you a version of Adobe. So it would be like the 2014 version of Adobe, the 2010 version of Adobe, and you would just have that. So it was very bulky. It's kind of similar to how you buy a license of Windows and you just have it. That's how actually software as a whole kind of operated until the early 2010s, roughly. They switched all into subscription models, right? But that's the situation there. If we want to look at free cash flow margins, and let's do operating margins as well. Free cash flow margins took a bit of a dip in the recent year. I'm not sure why exactly. I would assume something to do with like a tax deferral or something like that. Or maybe it has to do with the layoffs. I'm assuming they did layoffs in 2022, but I'm not sure exactly, right? Operating margins, about 37%, consistently going up and to the right. Same thing with free cash flow margin. So again, in terms of actual fundamentals, all these risks I outlined hasn't really showed up yet. Revenue growth compared to the past handful of years is also pretty strong. So what about valuation? And I kind of hinted at it towards the start of the video, but for example, if you just toggle on the price to free cash flow, we're at the lowest valuation this company has ever traded at. Well, I shouldn't say ever traded at, but in recent memory, it has traded at, right? So we're trading at about 18 times free cash flow. Now, of course, some of you are going to ask, but what about stock-based comp, which again, valid concern. This is my valuation to growth spreadsheet where I take the current valuation of a company and divide it by the expected growth rate. And so if we plug in Adobe here, I already put in the free cash flow amount, roughly 9.2 billion. Stock-based comp of, honestly, it's not even that bad, 1.8 billion. And then we'll play around with this, but if we hop over to analyst estimates, which I actually do not trust at all for Adobe, just because, you know, sort of disruption risk, the competitive nature of it. And then also, if we actually see margins bleed in the next handful of years, that could also kind of play into it. But this is on an annual view. I'm going to switch it to bar chart and just extend this out. You'll see that the expectation is to grow about 18% next year, or technically this year, 11% the year after that, and then it goes down to 7%. So analyst estimates, rather bearish if you ask me. In terms of EPS, I'm not sure why it goes to 64% growth. I would assume something to do with margins there. But yeah, steady state, about 10-12-ish% sort of bottom line growth. I'm going to just put in 12% for now. So if you expect Adobe to kind of follow the sort of 10%-ish revenue growth that they have done in the past handful of years, you do a little bit of margin expansion over time, just because, you know, the software business with like pretty much fixed development costs. There's not any like sort of variable cost that comes with the business. Software at the end of the day, right? So you do a little bit of margin expansion. If you wanted to do it on a per share basis, you could maybe stretch this to like 13%-ish growth, but I'm just going to keep it at 12 for now. You could see that like Adobe kind of ranks in the undervalued range, no doubt, but like at the same time, there's a lot of better opportunities, in my personal opinion, that I'm more keen on sort of buying into. And I said this in a previous video before, I'll say it again. With Adobe, it's not the AI risk that really scares me. I think that that'll definitely come, but I'm sure that Adobe by that point will figure out some way to monetize that or incorporate that into their products. And then additionally, another thing that we kind of didn't really touch on at all, but I think is important to mention, I think it's a continuation with AI. It's a continuation of the low end customer for Adobe moving away, and you know, it's good enough. Let me just give this to Dali or Sora or whatever, and they create a logo for me and it does the job, right? It's the marketing agencies that are the biggest revenue driver. It's the design firms. It's the real professionals that are able to pay $30 a month to Adobe, and then on the flip side, generate $100,000 per year in terms of revenue for the business, right? So at that point, it doesn't even matter to them that they're paying the $30 a month, even if their usage of Adobe products goes down by a factor of 2, call it, right? Because they're incorporating AI from other things. As long as they need Adobe in some capacity to be able to do their job, they're going to continue paying for that subscription. And so the biggest focus as an Adobe investor is like sort of what percentage of their customer base is actually going to be impacted by this. And again, I would assume, I don't know because they don't mention anything particularly insightful about sort of who their average customer is or anything like that. But I would assume it follows the trend of other software companies where the bulk of their revenues is from a cohort of power users that are probably never going to be switching away from Adobe and going to keep paying that subscription because it's mission critical to their job. And then at the same time, for my own personal portfolio, I just sold Salesforce for fears of slower growth, not necessarily disruption risk, but buying into Adobe is kind of just buying the same company. Not the same company, the same type of company, big mature software business. It doesn't necessarily speak to me in terms of valuation. It hasn't gotten to a point where like it's just eye-wateringly cheap. I think, maybe if you approach as it like around 340 or so, it comes out to a 5% stock-based comp adjusted free cash flow yield. I think at that point it becomes sort of a better value proposition. It becomes a little bit more interesting. And so with that being said, I'm probably just going to hold off on Adobe for now. I think if it slides towards like 340, 350-ish, that's when it gets closer to a 5% stock-based comp adjusted free cash flow yield, or 20 times actual free cash flows. At that point, you're pricing in like really, really cheap valuations into the business, or excuse me, very cheap, not cheap, very low levels of growth into the business. And like, you got to imagine that with the high switching costs that it comes with this business, the fact that it's a standard, the fact that there's a lot of professionals that are going to be continuing to use this software into the future, just them growing revenues 4 or 5% from raising prices, or raising prices from a little bit of volume growth, from a little bit of headcount growth. If you're a design firm with 100 employees today and you're going to have 110 next year, odds are you're going to buy them a license of Adobe, right? So just that little bit of organic growth with price increases and headcount growth, that's surely got to be worth something, right? So I don't know. It's definitely a hard decision to make. I definitely don't want to be buying into a business that's growing 4 or 5% just because I just sold Salesforce a little bit ago over complaints of the company going too slow. But we'll see. Now, with that being said, if you enjoyed this type of analysis, I post very long form sort of deep dives on companies of your request over on my Patreon. And that's going to be linked in the description down below. And by the way, you get a free trial to try it out. And on top of that, you get access to the Discord with 250 members, exclusive videos, exclusive analysis. You could also ask me different questions and that type of stuff. So yeah, check it out. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.